And welcome everyone to another exciting ACES webinar. I think you all know that we highly value the ability to communicate science and understand the importance of communicating science, not only with our collaborators and internally and our external collaborators, but communicating across a broad range of the spectrum of society that we work for. And so it's great today that we've got Cathal to give us some insights into this because he has experience on both sides of the spectrum, both from a research point of view. He completed his PhD here at URW and of course has worked at Biofab and is now a research fellow at RMIT. And also he's had experience working with Cosmos and various other writing for other organizations as well. So Cathal, thanks for agreeing to present some of your insights today, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to it and seeing what we can all learn from it. Really appreciate it. Thanks, man. I'll hand over to Cathal.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just share my screen and get started. Okay, so you should see my title slide there, I hope. So yes. I'm gonna, great. Okay. So yeah, I have been in the science communication for a while now. I mean, I guess I call myself a hack of all trades because I can do a bit of research, a bit of writing, but and I learned enough to get by, and I'll try and convey some of those learnings today. I'm going to talk about general science communication techniques that could be useful for giving talks or just explaining your work to your gran. I'll also talk about general writing techniques that could be useful for writing papers and grants. So these skills are not just about writing popular science articles for the general public. They can be used to enhance your career in many ways as a scientist. Okay. So what is writing? I mean, I'm opening this here the way that Stephen King opens his book on writing, which is an excellent read. He describes writing as telepathy. Okay, and I think he's got something there. You've got ideas that are originating in one person's mind, and you're transmitting them through some medium, paper or whatever, and another person picks it up, reads it, and those same ideas are basically transplanted into the second person's mind. I mean, it's kind of a weird way to look at it, but it's a kind of magic that we can do with good writing. Good writing maximizes the efficiency of this transmission of information. So we'll talk about efficiency later on. So why do you need to be good at it? Now, I once had a conversation with a laureate professor at Melbourne Uni about writing, and somebody said how very few scientists seem to be able to write well, and the professor just said, yeah, they're called professors. You know, his kind of reasoning was that the scientists who are able to convey their ideas effectively on the page, they end up rising through the ranks and end up at the top. I mean, they're successful at writing good papers, obviously, and writing good grants, and critical skills for your science career. So there's lots of other reasons why being able to write well is useful. Certainly in once you get an academic job, your metrics for promotion can actually depend upon, can have targets for public engagement, for media appearances and so on. It's about building your brand and being known as an expert. For example, writing for the conversation is a very good way to do that. And you won't be able to write for the conversation unless you can convey your ideas in a way that's understandable to the general public. It's been well studied over the years, and there's a paper here in PLOS just published this month on the topic, basically showing that the more media attention an article gets, the more citations that article will receive, and that scientific article will receive. We don't know whether that's causation or correlation, but certainly there's a strong relationship there between media exposure and between the number of citations. It's been shown in many studies. Obviously, nowadays, grants are being increasingly reviewed, not just by scientific peers, but also by lay reviewers, perhaps people from the government, business people, lawyers, politicians, and even patients in the medical sphere can read and review grants. So you need to be able to convey your scientific ideas to those people. Getting funding for your startup, also critical to make sure that the excitement of your research is being conveyed in an impactful way in that elevator pitch. And then it also gives you an edge in multidisciplinary research, because to a certain extent, when you're in a multidisciplinary team, if you're a chemist or you're a material scientist or whatever, and you're working with a biologist, it's kind of like working with a layperson who hasn't had that training in chemistry, and you have to be able to translate those ideas to be able to work on your research together. And some of the techniques I'll talk about, such as using metaphors and similes, can be applied just as well to actually having scientific conversations with your collaborators. And finally, a big reason is because it's a responsibility. I mean, I think that to convey our results to our bosses and our stakeholders, who are at the end of the day the general public, and I'll come back to that at the end. So building your brand, I'm going to show one example here of another former ACES graduate. This is full disclosure, this is my wife, Monica. So she started a science consultancy business a few years ago, working on the science of coffee. Her background is in chemical engineering, and she did her PhD at Monash through ACES in water splitting. And she's been writing for a couple of years now for this industry magazine called Bean Scene, which is read by baristas around Australia. And basically, a lot of her biggest clients have found her from reading these articles. So that just shows that getting out there, engaging the public can actually be the basis of how you get clients and build a business in this field. So how do you do it well? Let's go through a number of differences here. Firstly, between typical science article, peer-reviewed published research, and popular science articles. Okay. So the structure of a science article, it has this well-known structure which we know and love. Its purpose is to convey a lot of information in an organized way. Okay, you've got the abstract, introduction, materials and methods, etc., etc. Somebody should be able to read this and then reproduce the experiment. It's very, very different from a popular science article, which is organized in a way that has a different purpose. The purpose is to engage the reader. Everything about the way that the popular article is structured is about getting the person's attention and holding it until the end. Conveying information is a secondary consideration in a popular science article. Okay, so there's the hook, which is basically the opening line or a couple of lines for grabbing the reader's attention. There's the middle part here, which is also called the exposition, which is basically the guts of the article, the backstory, the problem, the solution that you've found. And there's putting this research into context. And then there's the kicker at the end, which is kind of like a punchline or a strong quote to make the piece memorable. Sometimes that's a bookend structure which calls back to the introduction. So we'll look at a couple of these elements now. So firstly, the hook. Now, this is important because, I mean, it's when you're talking to writing for the general public, they have no reason to read the article. It's not in their professional interest. They're just doing it out of their own curiosity, and you have to be mindful of that, and you have to be mindful that when you're trying to engage with the public, you're basically battling in a kind of war of attention, like Times Square here. You've got, especially on the internet, you've got hundreds of different things all vying for the person's attention. You have to make your article the most important thing in that person's field of vision, and make it stand out, make it grab their attention from the very first words. Otherwise, they're just going to put it down and they're not going to read it. So this is what not to do. This is what a lot of people do start off doing when they write their first article. You even see it sometimes in press releases. If a science journalist reads a press release that starts like this, they often won't finish it. Nobody cares where the result was published. Nobody cares who did it. Here we're already 20 words in, and none of them are interesting to the general person. You have to kind of have an idea about what is interesting to the general person, something that's quirky, that's fun, and basically put that most interesting thing at the start. I mean, you want to front load the story with the most interesting thing that will really grab them, or something striking or surprising. For example, here are a couple of good examples which I just picked up by going through an issue of Cosmos. So here by Katie Mack, an astrophysicist. So she's a scientist herself, writing for the public, and her opening line is, "Every once in a while, physicists come up with a new way to destroy the universe." You know, that kind of just pulls in your curiosity. You want to see what is this new way they've discovered, right, to destroy the universe. It's kind of got this science fiction edge to it, which is important because a lot of the people who read popular science articles are science fiction fans at heart. So that's always a good way to get into, to get their attention, is to have some kind of link to science fiction. Here's another one from James Mitchell Crowe. Ever had your phone shut down in the middle of an important message, or a computer crashes, you're about to click save? It may not be a software bug that's to blame. Your device might have just been the unlucky victim of a particle from outer space. So it's a bit longer. It's not as punchy, but at the same time, it's kind of linking something you're holding in your hand to an astrophysical phenomena. You know, something it's really connecting the reader to this new research. You know, that use of the second person tense is very effective here, putting you in the shoes of the person who's been impacted by a particle from outer space in this case, right? So it'll make you curious to read on. That's the whole purpose of the opening line. The hook is to make you read the rest of the story. Here's another example from a big news story back in 2012, the discovery of the Higgs boson, also called the God particle. On the left-hand side here is a kind of more sciencey language, science-focused one. Physicists working at the LHC have announced the discovery of the Higgs boson, or at least a particle that resembles the Higgs. I mean, it's okay, it does the job, but it's not a hook, okay? This example on the right, about the same story, this is one of my favorite opening lines in any science, popular science article. The whole opening paragraph is just 2 words: "It exists." And I think that's wonderful, because it's creating this resonance with the God particle idea. You know, basically it exists, standing for he exists. It kind of got this resonance to it, and coming at the end of a quest of many decades to find this particle, it justifies that kind of epic biblical tone, and I think it's a wonderful way, and to do that in just 2 words is really outstanding. Okay, and then moving on from the hook, we can't go into everything in too much detail. We'll just kind of skim through. Storytelling is where that comes into play in the middle of the article, where you're talking about the problem to be solved and how that was achieved. So here, I'd like to take the example of one of my favorite TV shows, Breaking Bad. So there are 3 ingredients of any good story that apply in screenwriting, in film, in novels, just as well as in popular science articles. You need to have a goal or an intention. In this case, in the case of Walter White, he wants to provide for his family after his cancer diagnosis. You need to have obstacles in the way, otherwise it's not interesting. If the character immediately achieves what they've been trying to do, it's not a story. So in the case of Breaking Bad, there are bad guys in the way. There's the whole morality question and his kind of weakling nature, which he overcomes as well. And then the third element of the story is the action, what they actually do, what the character does to overcome these obstacles. So in your case, the article might be about, say, improving the efficiency of batteries or something. It doesn't matter how kind of mundane it sounds, you can still apply the same principles to make your story as engaging as possible. So say you're trying to improve batteries, and that's your goal. You add weight to that goal by explaining to the reader how this could make a difference to their daily lives. You're always going to try and link your research to that person's daily life to make them invested in it. The obstacle might be some kind of material science problem, some poor transport properties of lithium or whatever. And the action is the innovation that you've developed that overcomes that problem. So now is not the time to get bogged down in details. When you're talking about overcoming the obstacles, basically you can do it twice. You can do it 3 times altogether. 3 is the magic number. So say you describe what is the obstacle. You can describe one way that you've tried to do it that failed. You can try a second way you've tried to do it that's failed, but the third time it has to work. Okay, so you can't go on too many times describing all the different avenues and options that you experimented with. Just do 3. Now, communicating the science part. This can be applicable to many to any kind of presentation, really. I wanted to give an example of Richard Feynman. I don't know if this will sound or work.
The Encyclopedia Britannica at home, and even.
Can you guys hear that now?
We can, yes.
Yeah.
You can. Okay, great.
He used to sit me on his lap and read to me from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we would say about dinosaurs, and maybe it would be talking about the Brontosaurus or something. And he would say something like, or the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And it would say something like, this thing is 25 feet high, and the head is 6 feet across, you see. And he'd stop always and say, let's see what that means. That would mean that if he stood in our front yard, he would be high enough to put his head through the window, but not quite, because the head is all a little bit too wide and would break the window as it came by. Everything we'd read would be translated as best we could into some reality, so that I learned to do that. That everything I read, I tried to figure out what it really means, what it's really saying.
Okay, I'll stop there. Oops. Okay. So that's Richard Feynman, one of the great physicists of the 20th century, and he's saying there, everything I read, I try to figure out what it really means. That lesson that his father gave to him about turning these kind of dry statistics about a dinosaur being 25 feet tall, placing that into a living, breathing image outside the bedroom door of Feynman when he was a child. I mean, that made it real for him, and that's what you need to be able to do to convey abstract notions to the general public, is turn them into real images, make the facts come alive. And reference points are critical for this. A classic example is if you're talking about something very small, you should relate it to something very small that's everyday, like an ant, like the width of a human hair. Never talk about nanometers and microns. You talk about these everyday objects which people can hold in their hand. That's basic. It's the basic rule of science communication. Another very useful tool is metaphor and analogy, and this is kind of the core of conveying the more abstract and difficult notions. I'll give you an example of one of the classic metaphors. Here is the Wikipedia entry for describing the telomere, which is a region of repetitive nucleotide sequences at the end of each chromosome, which protects the end of the chromosome from deterioration or from fusion with neighboring chromosomes. Okay, not really the most evocative language, but the way that it's usually described in the popular media is telomeres are caps at the end of each strand of DNA that protect our chromosomes, like the plastic tips at the end of shoelaces. So this image is, I mean, it's a perfect analogy here. And anybody who hears this analogy and they hear about telomeres, they'll remember for years, oh yeah, that's the shoelace thing, right? And you want something that's that short and sharp that'll convey the idea. And that's an example of a good metaphor. Any kind of metaphor or simile that takes longer than one line to describe is not worth having. And that's another kind of classic mistake that scientists make when they're getting into this business. They overcomplicate their analogies and they try to shoehorn in something that just has too many levels of meaning. So just make it as simple as possible. Other classic examples are mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, or the Goldilocks zone being a habitable region around a star. Of course, a problem with some of these is that they become cliches because they're so successful. And when they become cliches, the reader stops paying attention to them. So there's always a balance there. Now, onto good writing itself. So I know that Doug is going to give a talk in a few weeks talking about this in more detail. So I'll just leave it to one or two slides. But basically, the essence of good writing is brevity. It's conveying that information in as few words as possible, and using short words, using short sentences, short paragraphs. I highly recommend this essay by Orwell, where he describes 6 rules of language, which are just as relevant today as they were decades ago. And it's critical to be able to translate the scientific jargon into everyday language. Okay, let's get into that. Translating language. Here's the thesis title, my PhD thesis title, which on the left-hand side there is a bit of a mouthful: novel strategies for depositing nanoelectrode materials, blah, blah, blah. But you know, you can translate that into 6 or 7 simple words, drawing tiny wires with a small pointy stick. And I think that if there's one thing that everybody here, what I would like them to do is to try this themselves. You can tweet it to me later on, you know, your thesis title, or if it's not fully developed yet, just the name of your project. Write it out in these really short, simple words. And it's a great exercise in this translation of scientific jargon into everyday language, which we all need to be able to do. Okay, there are other examples here. XKCD have a whole panel about the Saturn V rocket, which they've called the Upgoer 5, basically describing the whole rocket using only the 1,000 most common words in English. There are tools out there which can help you do this. So you can put in a block of text and it will tell you if you've used a piece of jargon. I'm going to skip through some of this because I'm going a bit too slow, but the links are there. Now, the writing process, this is one thing that everybody struggles with, regardless of the task. But when you're writing about for the general public, I think it really helps to imagine you're just talking to one person. And it's best if you can actually imagine who that is. Maybe it's your dad or your granny, or someone who fits the kind of target audience of the medium you're writing for. And a good trick that I've used before is to actually write the article as a draft in an email. The reason that works for me anyway is because, you know, I write a lot of emails, and when I'm writing emails, there's a strong mental association that will help me get words down on the page in an email application rather than in typing into blank document. So that has worked for me before. Obviously disconnect from the internet. That sometimes is critical for just getting into the zone. I've ended up doing a lot of riding on the tram when out of internet range, and that has been a way I've got through some blocks before. So I recommend doing that. And work in blocks of intensity. So give yourself an hour with everything else shut off, and then just do as much as you can. It's amazing how that can really force you to get through it. If you're really stuck, get out and go for a run, and always be reminding yourself, you know, what is exciting me about this topic, and focus on that at the beginning. So editing, this is obviously a critical part of the writing process. To me, I think about it like an active excavation, right? You're pulling out and highlighting the core of the ideas in a block of text, and you're polishing them so that they shine through. And it involves removing a lot of waste material. Typically, at least 1/3 of the words that you start with will go. That really sharpens up the result in the end. Sometimes you need to get rid of sentences that you're really proud of. And that's what the phrase "kill your darlings" is all about. There's a big Australian literary magazine called "Kill Your Darlings." Sometimes you have to do that for the good of the piece. So okay, I'll skip through it here. As an example, I mean, I've taken a piece here that science communication student wrote about one of our projects at BioFab. And it's a bit long, it's a bit wordy. I was going to read it all out, but I'm probably going too slow to do that. I'll just kind of skip through to how we edited that down to make it more short, more snappy, and grab the attention, and remove all of the unnecessary, more scientific points. For example, instead of starting with bone fractures are one of the most commonly occurring injuries of the human body, blah, 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 we just start with a single word, snap. The crack of a broken bone is always agonizing, right? You're just trying to grab their attention and getting into the core of it here, but sometimes it's life-changing, and focusing especially on its effect on older people. And then it gets into the core idea of the story, which is about using electrical device for healing these devices. I mean, the point is that all of the original ideas are still there, but it's been achieved with much simpler language and much fewer words. And you can even quantify this. So here, we've put the 2 blocks of text through this automated readability checker, which will give you kind of a reading age score for any piece of writing. So what we're targeting here, what we want to achieve, is a reading level of about 12 for a typical popular science article. So I recommend to do this to kind of calibrate your writing, so that you can help weed out the use of jargon and get used to writing in a more kind of everyday language. And take a block of text that you've written, put it into a checker like this, and it will tell you what words the typical person does not know. Okay, typical person does not know what a polymer is, or what an electrochemist does, for example. And this all requires the editing process also requires a kind of you have to put yourself in the mind of the person who's going to read it, and work out what do they know. Don't assume knowledge. You have to kind of go step by step, and build upon what is essentially a starting point of zero knowledge about your topic. Okay. Some common mistakes made by scientists, and then I'll wrap it up with probably 1 or 2 slides. What people tend to do when they're moving from science into popular science is they write a topic, not a story. They try to be comprehensive to cover all the bases. I mean, you can't do that. In a popular science article, you've got room to convey maybe one new idea, and you have to decide what that is, and focus on that. Otherwise, the whole story will be too muddled, and the reader won't get anything out of it. Scientists tend to use too many statistics, which we've talked about already, translating those into more relatable ideas. They assume too much knowledge. They don't appreciate what average people know about science, which in a lot of cases is not very much. But this is more important, is not providing, a bigger mistake is not providing context, no big picture which links the research to that person's lived experience. Not grabbing the reader, we've talked about, and these language issues, of course. And then there's the lack of storytelling flair, which just comes from not having experience in this intention, obstacle, action kind of structure. So in kind of conclusion, there are some lessons here that kind of come out of the examples that we've gone through. It's critical to translate the scientific language into everyday speech. Try to make the facts come alive. Write stories, not topics. Convey just one new idea per story. Consider the reader. So the audience that you're writing for will very much dictate the language and the style that you use, and whatever you do, achieve that with the minimum use of words, and make them as simple and as possible. Okay, I was going to talk about sensationalism in science, but it's probably too late now, so I'll leave it there and open to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathal. Crowd's gone wild. You just can't hear them.
I'm imagining. Okay.
If anybody's got any questions, you can either put it in the type it in the chat, or convey your interest in questioning Cathal some other way. Cathal, I'll just kick it off. I mean, so what's the best way for people to practice, and get feedback? You mentioned a couple of things, but obviously it's not that obvious, how you practice these things, and more importantly, probably how you get that feedback that can help you improve.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess I can speak to my own experience. The way that I started off in my PhD was entering a science communication competition, and the Fresh Science competition that's open every year in Australia. There's a few others now, different versions. I got some good training with real science journalists through that program. I also did some like a blog for the Illawarra Mercury when I'm living in Wollongong. So often newspapers are, local newspapers especially, are very interested in providing a platform for researchers, and you can also offer to write articles about your research for your research organization, and often the comms team will be very happy to accommodate that. So they're the kind of things that I did at the start. They're all important for building up a portfolio that you can then show to editors later on, and allow you to take the further steps in the field.
And that sort of local writing, for example, from the local newspaper, did you get feedback and that was really useful in developing the skills further?
Not so much from the newspaper, no. They were more from the local comms team at the university. So we went through a bit of an editing phase internally before going out to the paper. I mean, a bit like an internal peer review with collaborators, right? And that's where I got some good feedback and guidance. But the actual journalists wouldn't really have time for that. They're usually pretty too busy.
Yeah. Got a question from Karim about academic writing and how you can improve that, and suggesting that can you achieve that through reading a lot of articles. And I guess the same question probably applies to sort of more general science communication.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that one critical thing is to read quality articles. So if you read articles in high quality academic journals like Nature and Science, I mean, they're always pristinely written, and that's a good way to kind of assimilate good writing. Whereas if you're reading, you know, lower ranking journals, you may not get that same impression, right? Same thing with science articles, and I can definitely recommend some excellent publications, including Cosmos, and some excellent books. Unfortunately, a lot of the science that we're exposed to in the media is not good science writing. So in the health field, you know, a lot of the science stories nowadays are not written by people with science backgrounds, and you can't really point to them as good examples of science writing, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it sort of, Kate must have read your mind what you were going to say, because she's just saying in the current world of fake news, how much responsibility as researchers do you think we have compared to the media outlets to effectively transfer knowledge to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually where I was going to finish off the talk before I ran on, but it is absolutely our responsibility. Nowadays, it's the end of the science journalist. I mean, their days are numbered. It used to be the case that every newspaper had a science desk with people trained in science, and they would be able to write these articles with you know, critical approach. And the money, the salaries have gone from those kind of especially in newspapers, and it's left behind a vacuum, which is being filled by people who don't necessarily have respect for objective reality, shall we say, and they're just you know, pushing their own agenda, right? In the science realm, I mean, it's our duty now to step in and fill that gap, and to talk directly to the public, and thankfully there are platforms now where we can do that, especially via Twitter and blogs and avenues like The Conversation. And I think it's absolutely our responsibility to do that, to fill that vacuum, and to make sure that the public has a reliable source of information about these important topics.
Yeah, totally agree. Look, I might just wrap it up there. I'm sure Cathal will take any other questions and comments by email or by other means of that you can connect with Cathal. So I'd just like to thank Cathal again for the presentation. I totally agree with him. I'm sure we all would, that it is our responsibility to communicate good science and to communicate it at all levels, even to some of those on the screen who might not want to listen. And so it's important that we hone those skills so that we are effective communicators of the science, and particularly communicating, as Cathal has said, to the people that we ultimately work for, and that's the communities that we work in and live in. So thanks again, Cathal, on behalf of everyone who's attended today, and we'll catch up soon, I'm sure. And thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
See you.